Welcome back, friends. This is Yvonne Davis, your traveling warrior astrologer. And today I'm going to be looking at a couple of charts. And as I bring them up, I'll explain what's going on here. First of all, as you can see from the title, this is called Following World Astrology Report. And the reason why it's titled that is because I was watching Dan Waite's latest video on Pluto out of bounds, and I was just so fascinated by it. The thing is, when I watched it, I got really curious because he said that the peak of this Pluto out of bounds cycle is supposed to be in October of 2030. So of course I got really curious and I wanted to see what the transits look like on that day. So I'm going to show you. Before I do so, I just want to give a shout out to Dan Waits and Rosie Finn, his guest on World Astrology Report, because I did not know about this Pluto out of bounds cycle. And this was really, really interesting. So I definitely suggest that you check it out if you haven't seen it already. I'll put a link below so that it will be easy for you to do so. All right, so let's go ahead and look at two charts. I for sure want to look at the October 2030 chart because he said that that was the peak of this out of bounds cycle that's coming up. And it has to do with revolution of the people, which is interesting because that's what I was talking about in my last video. I was saying that we're clearly seeing the awakening of class consciousness. So if you haven't seen my latest video, I will put a link at the end. I'll put a link below as well, so you can check that out too, okay? This is going to be a multi-part series because I think that there are a lot of really powerful things happening. We're already beginning to see it, but it will really, really, really start to become more obvious in 2025. And that has a lot to do with the fact that some of these planets are going to be changing signs, the outer planets. We've already seen Pluto move into Aquarius, which is incredibly powerful. We're already beginning to see the changes brought about by that. We're also going to see Neptune step into Aries in 2025, and we're going to see Saturn step into Aries in 2025. They will both shift back into Pisces for a short period of time, and then they will move back into Aries, and they will conjoin at 0 degrees of Aries, starting a whole new synodic cycle with those two planets in Aries. And that's going to be so incredibly powerful for change. Another thing we're going to see is Jupiter will also change signs in 2025. It will move into Cancer. And then in 2026, it will move into Leo, a fire sign, which is interesting because it will begin to make trines to the planets in Aries. And I just mentioned that Neptune and Saturn are going into Aries. So Jupiter will be making fire trines to those two planets in Aries. It will also make alignments with Uranus, which will move into Gemini in 2026. And we'll have a moment in time in July of 2026 when all four planets, Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, and Jupiter, will be at 4 degrees of either fire or air signs. So they'll be making very harmonious trines. That doesn't always mean we have harmony in the world. It just means that the energy flows well, okay? It's not blocked, in other words. So I just think that we are on the precipice of some really profound change. And then we get the Uranus return to the U.S. Sibley chart, which is the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which many consider the birth of our nation. So I'm going to show you that chart, the Uranus return on the Sibley chart, and that's in July of 2027. So that's only 2.5 years from now. And we're already seeing changes now, and we're definitely going to see more changes all throughout 2025 and 2026 until we get to the Uranus return in July of 2027. And then I'll take you 5 years into the future to October of 2030, which is the date mentioned by Dan Waits in World Astrology Report. Again, I really want to say thank you to him for that video because I think that it was an incredibly powerful video with really important information. And I appreciate seeing that. All right, so let me go ahead and start talking about the charts, and I'll bring them up so you can see them. The first one I want to talk about is the Uranus return chart in July of 2027, only 2.5 years from now. Now, as I said, that doesn't mean we just sit around twiddling our thumbs, like waiting. No, things are already happening. Things don't all happen, just overnight. They build and they build and they build and they build to a tipping point. And then there's an event that is a very distinct tipping point, okay? And so I believe that Uranus return is a peak in the energy, and we will begin to see those tipping points around that time. But we're already building up to it. So it's not like we're just twiddling our thumbs waiting. We will see the changes. We're already seeing them. We'll see them more in 2025 and 2026. Unfortunately, a lot of that is going to be born out of strife, struggle, suffering, conflict. That's the bad news. But it's just the truth that breakthrough usually doesn't happen. And Uranus is the planet of breakthrough, but it usually doesn't happen without a breakdown. It's just the nature of the reality that we live in. So that chart happens in July of 2027, 2.5 years from now. And there are two things that I see really interesting in that chart. One is a T-square, and that is formed by Saturn making a square to natal Pluto in the chart. Pluto is power, and natal Mercury in the chart. Mercury is communication, the way we think about things and how we communicate our ideas, like what we call the narrative, okay? It can also rule things like politics, public speaking, legislation, the media. It's any way that we communicate ideas and the way we think about things. So even though Jupiter really rules our worldview, Mercury is like the fine details of the worldview. It's like the information that we communicate that builds up our worldview. So Saturn's making a T-square to that. And my understanding when I'm reading this chart is that Saturn is basically the establishment. Saturn is the old establishment. It can also be a restructuring, especially in a square to Pluto, because Pluto is power. So it's like there's two things going on here. It's like a battle for the structure, okay? A battle for the establishment. Will it be the old establishment reasserting itself, or will it be a transformation of power and a restructuring of the establishment? And that's kind of what I'm seeing here, because it's a Uranus return and because Pluto is being squared by Saturn, and that square creates pressure and friction for change, okay? It's like steam building up. Something has to change. The pressure becomes so intense that it's like causing a breakthrough, okay? So there's a battle going on between the old structure and the new structure. And you may think you know what the old structure and the new structure are, but let me just say, I suspect it's not what you think. And the reason why I say that is because when we talk about the old structure, that means that the two-party system. So it means that the structure of the two-party system and the way it has existed since the end of World War II, so basically since around 1944, there was a new world order that was built, that was born out of the end of World War II, which was supposed to save us from ever having to go back to that. That was the structure that we've lived in ever since then. And our two-party system was part of that, the way it is now, the way it's structured now. And so I'm not talking about we will like tip to the left or we'll tip to the right. I'm saying that whole structure is going to be pretty much defunct. Now, we may still have it like on the surface, but the underneath of what those parties represent will definitely be different, okay? So do not even try to imagine that this new structure will look anything like the old structure, except maybe just on the surface, you know, like in terms of a two-party system, maybe they keep the same names, but the whole view of the way what people value and the way they express their values and how they believe they can resolve the problems and how they go about solving the problems, I believe will be very different, like nothing we've seen before. Okay. And because of this idea of Pluto out of bounds to the south, which you'll understand when you see Dan Waite's video on World Astrology Report, then you'll understand that this is the place to be, okay? Because it is revolutionary. It's coming from the people, okay? It's not coming from the top down. It's not authoritarian. It's not dictatorship. We may see some attempts at dictatorship because a lot of times these things happen at the same time. When there's a restructuring of the whole social order, which, you know, part of the social order is the economics and the politics and the worldview and the values and all of that and the way that we live our lives. And so we may see like this battle or conflict going on both at the top level between the most wealthy and powerful people, like different countries in conflict. But I think what will really emerge, that will be what lasts, will emerge out of the people, out of a revolution that comes from the people and what the people actually want, okay? And that's what will survive. So I'm looking forward to that. And I think that this chart for the Uranus return is showing us the direction that this is moving in and kind of giving us a time frame. We already got the time frame from the Pluto out of bounds and its peak period, but now I am looking at the transits for that particular month. So in this Uranus return chart, what we also see is that we have a kite between Pluto, which is power, which by the way is right on the south node. I mean, this is incredibly karmic. The US is having a reverse nodal return with Pluto on the north node, transiting south node and Pluto right on the south node of the United States. So it's extraordinary. It's a total reversal and a total restructuring, in my opinion. And the other planets in the kite at the time of the Uranus return are also Uranus in Gemini, Mars in Libra, and Neptune in Aries. And so when you look at a kite, if you think about a kite flying in the sky, there's that point at the top of the kite that guides the kite. You know, it's the direction that the kite is moving in. It's following that point. That's the direction that it moves in. And so when you look at a kite in a natal chart, basically what you're looking at is the point of the kite is the direction that we're moving in. And that's where Neptune is. So Neptune is our ideals. Okay, so we're moving in the direction of our ideals. And I think that when I look at the chart for October 2030, which is the peak of the Pluto out of bounds, I think you'll see that we are actually moving in what appears to be a positive direction. Now, anything and everything can have a shadow. So we always have to keep that in mind, okay? Because we want to get the most positive expression of this energy. All right, so now I'm going to go look at the October 2030 chart. All right, so you can find the chart on the screen, and what you will see, what I'm going to point to first, is the fact that in October of 2030, Jupiter moves into Sagittarius. Now, I wasn't sure which day in October 2030 I should look at, so I looked at a few different charts, and I decided to go with this one on October 22nd, 2030, because of the fact that you can see Jupiter has moved into Sagittarius. It's at 0 degrees of Sagittarius. It's just moved in. This is super interesting because the US Sibley chart has a Sagittarius ascendant. By the way, the Constitution of the United States chart also has a Sagittarian ascendant, and we see the North Node there, okay? This is super, super important because when you have the North Node in the first house is like the personality of the country, or, if you're obviously looking at a human being, you're looking at a human being's personality. But in this case, we're looking at the personality of the nation. And we have a Sagittarian ascendant. That means that our personality is very Sagittarian or very Jupiterian. And so we are looking at things like a big country. I mean, big geographically, but also big. Like everything is big. Like go big or go home. Big trucks, big cars, big RVs, big houses, big land, big sky, big money, big military, big in the world, everything. And big people too. Actually, that's one of the jokes that people make about Americans, is that Americans are very large people. So Jupiter is very big, and it can also be very benefic, and it has this ideal of truth and justice, okay? And it likes to travel. And I think that Americans definitely I think many Americans very much like to travel. And of course, we have passport privilege, which means we can pretty much travel anywhere in the world that we want. So when you see this chart with Jupiter in Sagittarius, this great benefic, truth and justice coming into the first house, that's its home, that's its domicile. So it functions probably at its best when it's in Sagittarius. So it's going to be very strong in Sagittarius. And the North Node is there, and it's going to conjoin the North Node there. So what that means is that it's almost like this energy is doubled, because the North Node has an energy very much like Jupiter. So we've got these two really powerful, expansive, forward-moving, outward-moving planets and energies. And I think that's really kind of the idea, is that there's this expansion of what the US is really about, what we say we're about. We say we're about truth and justice. But has that been true? Or has that just been the image that we've always believed about ourselves and presented? And I think in this case, Jupiter is coming in to clean things up. Okay. And this is important because we're talking about this revolutionary peak period of time. And now Jupiter is coming in to clean things up and to make sure that we are truly living up to our ideal image. Okay. Now, of course, as I said, there's always the potential for the shadow side to take over. And the shadow of Jupiter is righteousness. And this attitude like, I know everything. I'm going to tell you what you need to believe because I'm righteous. I know everything. I'm a know-it-all. And I'm going to tell you what to do and what to think. That's the shadow side of Jupiter. It's not a pretty picture when you look at the shadow of Jupiter. So I'm very much hoping that we will not be in the shadow of Jupiter, that we'll be in the true light expression of Jupiter, because the true light expression of Jupiter is very hopeful, positive, benefic, generous, very buoyant, positive, optimistic, kind, and really gregarious, likes people, likes to get along with people, enjoys the company of other people, and it's just a generally kind and generous energy. And also, like I said, it is very expansive and forward thinking. And so it wants to do things, it's visionary. It wants to make things happen. And it has the energy and the positivity to make things happen. So that, combined with the North Node in the first house puts more responsibility on the self. So in this case, the focus is more on the US and saying, who are we? Who do we need to be? Who do we need to become to be our best self as a nation? And how can we take responsibility for that instead of blaming externals and saying, well, if only they didn't do this, we wouldn't have to do that, and all that really, needs to go away when you see Jupiter and the North Node there, because the North Node definitely says we need to take responsibility. We need to make this work. We need to stop waiting for somebody else to do it. We need to stop blaming and pointing fingers. It's our responsibility to make this country great, okay? Our responsibility, not somebody else's, okay? As you can see, Pluto is now at 9 degrees, so it has made that conjunction to the South Node, and it may have actually made a conjunction multiple times as it retrogrades and then turns direct again. So it is bringing about this profound fundamental transformation. It's still in a sextile to Neptune in Aries. Again, Neptune is ideals. Aries is the warrior. And so Aries wants to take action to bring about those ideals. Again, hopefully it's not in the shadow. You know, the shadow again would be somewhat similar to the shadow of Jupiter, which is this like idealistic but ideological righteousness. It's just not a pretty picture, let me put it that way. So hopefully we won't be in the shadow of those planets. We'll be in the bright light side of those planets. But that's up to us as a people and our own personal shadow, our shadow as a nation, and how we are willing to acknowledge it and integrate it as opposed to repress it, because when you repress it, it comes out in ugly ways. And at this time now, Saturn and the South Node are conjunct Uranus. So now it's like trying to take the old establishment, which is Saturn, and also the South Node, because the Saturn and the South Node have a similar energy, and they're combined there on Uranus. And it's like trying to build a new establishment that is born out of the revolutionary energy that comes from the people, that emerges from the people instead of being top down. We also see Uranus on Mars. And it's interesting too, because Mars is conjunct the moon in the 10th house. So seeing the natal Mars activated in the 7th house and Mars in the 10th house leads me to feel that there is still some conflict going on. In fact, we may be right in the middle of it at this point, because this is the peak. And so there's probably conflict definitely going on in our country, but possibly external. In fact, probably both. But with Uranus, again, that's a very revolutionary energy. So the combination of Uranus and Mars in the 7th house, I think, is a very revolutionary kind of energy. Exactly how that's going to manifest itself, I don't really want to make too many predictions, because I think that we need to keep our minds open and flexible, and always trying to look for the best way that this could express itself. Because again, this is coming from us, the people. We're the ones who are expressing this energy. So we need to decide what is the best way for us to express this energy and interact with it. So we'll continue to have the energy of Jupiter and the North Node and Pluto and Neptune and the South Node and Saturn and Uranus all expressing their energy in a way that's flowing. And because it's, in the trines and sextiles. But I just want to be really careful about not always assuming that that means it's harmonious, because sometimes energy can flow really easily, but it can do so for nefarious reasons. So it really depends on what is behind the energy, the one that's pushing it. It'll push easily, but if it's a nefarious energy, like if it's emerging from a nefarious purpose, then the energy flows well for that nefarious purpose. So that's one of the things we want to be really careful about, is understanding, are we putting our best selves into the world to create this new revolutionary country, and in fact, maybe even revolutionary world. All right, so that's all I have for you today. I hope you found that interesting. Like I said, I'm going to do a series of videos along these topics and continue to discuss other topics that interest me around mysteries of science and the supernatural, because I think we're going to be interacting with that white a bit as well over the next 20 years. We're already seeing like glimpses of how that might show itself. So I'm going to be looking at both of these things. All right, I hope you enjoyed this. And if you did, go ahead and check out the first video in this series, which was all about awakening class consciousness. And I will see you again in the next video. Bye-bye.